Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. Allie arrived at the police station so suddenly, so out of place among the buzzing lights and the smell of burnt coffee and old paper, that people stopped talking and even the guard looked up in surprise. The glass doors slammed open, and she walked in with wet hair stuck to her face and a look in her eyes that said she had already gone past a point of no return. This wasn't the Allie anyone expected to see. This wasn't the quiet, careful woman who had tried so hard to stay out of the way while everything around her fell apart. This was someone who had been pushed to the edge, someone who had come to tell the truth she couldn't carry anymore. As she looked around the room, her eyes locked onto Noah, who stood near the interrogation room with his hands tied, his face tense, his body stiff, and his expression caught between anger and tiredness. In that moment when they looked at each other, the air felt charged with everything they had never said and all the lies they had told themselves to keep going. Noah knew even before she spoke that whatever she had to say wouldn't save him. It wouldn't make the consequences of what he did any softer. It would only make his guilt worse. As officers moved to stop her, she raised her trembling hands and spoke clearly, saying she was there to tell the truth, that Noah needed to hear it even if it broke him. She had protected him for too long, and that protection had cost too many people too much. Noah's breath caught as he realized something terrible. The story he had been telling himself, the excuse he had used to justify what he did, was about to be torn apart. When Allie was taken into the interview room and Noah sat across from her under the harsh light, the space between them felt like a deep canyon filled with regret. She started slowly, telling him about the nights he thought she was asleep, the moments he thought were private, but she was listening, watching, knowing. She told him about the files he had hidden, the messages he had deleted, the call he made the night everything went wrong, the call he said no one could trace. When Noah denied it, saying she didn't understand, Allie leaned forward and told him the secret that broke his last hope. She had been there that night, not where he thought she was, but close enough to see what happened, close enough to hear his panic, close enough to know that the disaster he blamed on chance was actually the result of his fear and desperation. She told him she had picked up the phone after he ran away, had heard the voice on the other end say his name and confirmed the plan. Noah's face turned pale as the truth hit him. She knew what he had done, and she had helped him cover it up. She had lied to the police, changed her story to protect him, believing she was saving him from a mistake. But she realized too late that she was enabling something much worse. As the officers wrote notes and looked at each other, Allie admitted she had been the anonymous person who tried to stop everything before it got worse, the one Noah had cursed when the investigation got closer, never knowing it was the person he trusted most who was trying to stop the damage he had caused. Noah's hands shook as he whispered her name, like a prayer, like an apology, like a desperate wish to go back in time. But Allie didn't stop. Her voice cracked as she told him that what he had done, manipulating evidence, intimidating a witness, letting an innocent person take the fall, wasn't about love or protection. It was about control. That was when she knew she had to stop protecting him, because loving him didn't mean giving up her conscience or the lives of others to save him from his own fear. When she finally looked at him again, tears were streaming down her face, not because of anger, but because she was mourning the man she thought he was, the future they might have had. Noah felt something inside him break as he realized, with terrible clarity, that every move he made to avoid losing her had led him straight into it. The regret in his chest wasn't just for being caught, but for betraying the person who believed in him, even when he didn't deserve it. When the officer asked Allie to confirm her statement and she nodded, steady despite the pain, Noah bowed his head and let out a broken breath, knowing there was no argument left, no excuse that could change what had just happened. As Allie left the room, she paused at the door and looked back one last time, telling him that it wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was the only way she could break the cycle of harm he had started, the only way she could finally let him face the truth. The door closed behind her, echoing down the hall. Noah was left alone under the harsh light, drowning in the realization that the worst part of what he had done wasn't the charges he now faced, but the knowledge that he had forced the woman who loved him to become the one who told the truth. And that regret, heavier than any sentence, would follow him long after the cell door closed. The next chapter begins not with noise but with a suffocating silence that settles over the police station after Allie's departure, a silence so thick it presses against Noah's ears until every breath sounds like a confession, because the truth she left behind has altered the gravity of the room itself, bending every stare, every whisper, every scrape of a chair leg toward him as if the building now recognizes him for what he has become. And Noah sits there with his cuffed hands resting uselessly on the metal table, staring at the faint smear of condensation left by Allie's glass of water, unable to stop replaying the exact moment her eyes changed when she said she had been there that night, because in that instant something inside him ruptured, something he had carefully sealed away beneath layers of justification and fear. And as the door creaks open and the detective steps back in with a folder thicker than before, Noah realizes with a sickening clarity that Allie's secret did not just expose his crime, it rewrote the entire narrative of his life, stripping away the version of himself he had clung to as a shield. And when the detective calmly explains that Allie's statement corroborates evidence they couldn't previously place, that timelines now align in ways that leave little room for doubt, Noah's pulse pounds so violently he feels it in his throat, because this is the moment where regret transforms into something sharper, more corrosive, the understanding that his actions didn't spiral out of control accidentally but followed a deliberate path he chose again and again. And as the detective lists each choice, each lie, each manipulation, each silent moment when Noah could have stopped and didn't, Noah's mind drifts backward, not to the crime itself but to the earlier moments, the smaller decisions he once dismissed as harmless, the first time he deleted a message, the first time he convinced himself that protecting himself was the same as protecting others, and he realizes now that Allie had seen those moments long before the night everything exploded, had watched him rationalize and retreat into secrecy, had loved him anyway until loving him became a danger to her own soul. And somewhere down the hall Allie pauses near the exit, pressing a hand to her chest as if to steady her racing heart, because even though she knows she did the right thing, the weight of it threatens to pull her apart, knowing Noah will hate her, knowing he will suffer, knowing that the truth she spoke will echo through courtrooms and headlines and family dinners for years to come. And yet she also feels something else beneath the grief, something fragile but undeniable, a sense of release, because the burden she carried alone is finally out in the open. And as she steps into the rain-soaked night she whispers an apology to no one in particular, mourning the man Noah could have been if he had only chosen differently. While back inside the station Noah's world continues to collapse in slow, merciless increments, the detective informing him that additional charges are now being considered, that a witness previously unwilling to testify has come forward, emboldened by Allie's statement, and that the person Noah allowed to take the fall is being re-evaluated for immediate release, a fact that hits Noah harder than anything else because it forces him to confront the human cost of his cowardice, the life derailed because he was too afraid to face consequences. And as he finally speaks, his voice hoarse and unsteady, it is not to defend himself but to ask one devastating question, whether Allie is safe, revealing in that moment that despite everything, despite the betrayal and the exposure, part of him still loves her in the only way he knows how, flawed and too late. And the detective's neutral response, that Allie has left the premises and declined further contact, lands like a verdict of its own, severing the last thread of connection Noah hoped might remain. And when he is led down the corridor toward a holding cell, the echoes of his footsteps sound like punctuation marks on the end of a life he once recognized, and he wonders if Allie will ever forgive herself for telling the truth, if she will ever stop replaying his face when she revealed her secret, while Allie, standing beneath a flickering streetlight, watches the rain blur the city around her and realizes that her next chapter will not be about running or hiding or cleaning up someone else's mess, but about rebuilding from the wreckage of loving the wrong person too fiercely. And as dawn begins to creep toward the horizon, casting pale light over the station and the streets beyond, both of them sit on opposite sides of an irreversible truth, knowing that nothing ahead will be easy, that the consequences are only beginning, but also understanding in their own painful ways, that the moment Allie walked into that station and spoke the secret aloud was the moment the past finally loosened its grip, even as it tightened around Noah's heart, ensuring that his regret, deep, relentless and inescapable, will follow him into whatever future awaits behind locked doors. The next chapter unfolds in a relentless surge of consequence and reckoning as morning light bleeds through the narrow windows of the holding area and finds Noah awake, hollow-eyed, every muscle aching from a night spent pacing the limits of a cell that feels smaller with every truth now known, because sleep never came, only the endless replay of Allie's voice, calm but devastated, each word a blade he sharpened himself. And when the guards lead him out for arraignment, the hallway feels longer than it ever has, lined with faces he cannot read, some curious, some condemning, some disappointed in ways that hurt far worse than anger. And as his name is called in a courtroom that smells faintly of old paper and stale air, Noah realizes that this is the first time he has been forced to stand still and let the world see him without the armor of excuses. And across town, Allie sits alone in her apartment with the curtains drawn, staring at the phone she turned off hours ago because she cannot bear another message asking if she is okay when she doesn't yet know the answer, because the truth she told did not end anything cleanly. It detonated a life she once thought she understood. And yet as she presses her palms to her eyes, she remembers the precise instant she decided to walk into the police station, the moment fear finally lost its grip, replaced by the certainty that silence would make her complicit forever. And while Noah listens as the charges are read aloud, each one stacking higher than the last, Allie listens to the city wake up outside her window, car horns and footsteps and distant voices reminding her that life is continuing without waiting for her to catch up. And when the judge sets bail at a number that makes Noah's stomach drop, it becomes painfully clear that the version of escape he once believed in, money, influence, clever maneuvering, no longer applies, because Allie's testimony has stripped him of leverage. And as his lawyer whispers urgently beside him, outlining options and strategies, Noah hears none of it, his thoughts fixed on the image of the innocent man he allowed to be blamed, now possibly walking free because Allie refused to keep lying. And the shame of that knowledge settles into him like a permanent ache, because he understands now that regret is not loud or dramatic but persistent, gnawing, impossible to outrun. And as he is escorted back into custody, the weight of what he has done finally forces him to confront the truth he avoided for so long, that his actions were never about survival but about fear of losing control, fear of being seen as flawed, fear of facing consequences like everyone else. And miles away, Allie finally turns her phone back on, watching messages flood in from people who know pieces of the story but not its full cost, and she ignores them all except one, a single text from an unknown number thanking her for her honesty and telling her that because of her, someone's brother is coming home. And she collapses onto the floor, sobbing not from relief but from the crushing awareness that doing the right thing does not erase the pain it causes, it only ensures the pain has meaning. And as days pass in a blur of legal proceedings and whispered headlines, Noah begins to understand that his punishment will not be defined solely by a sentence but by the long, quiet moments when he has nothing left to distract himself from the person he has become, the nights when he lies awake replaying every fork in the road where he chose himself over others. And when Allie is called back to give further testimony, she walks into the courthouse with steady steps despite the tremor in her hands, because she has learned that courage does not feel powerful, it feels necessary. And when she catches a glimpse of Noah across the room, their eyes meet briefly, no anger left, only exhaustion and an unspoken acknowledgement that whatever they once were no longer exists. And Noah lowers his gaze first, not because he blames her, but because he finally accepts that she did what he could not. And as her words help dismantle the final layers of deception surrounding the case, the truth becomes undeniable, reshaping not just the outcome of the trial but the narrative everyone believed. And when the verdict is eventually delivered, heavy and irreversible, Noah stands as the weight of it settles over him, understanding that the life he imagined ended the moment Allie walked into that station. And yet, in that understanding there is a brutal clarity, a realization that regret, while suffocating, is also the first honest emotion he has felt in years. And outside the courthouse, Allie breathes in fresh air as reporters shout questions she refuses to answer, knowing that her story does not belong to them, that the chapter she just closed was never meant for public consumption but for her own conscience. And as Noah is led away one final time, the sound of the door closing behind him echoes with a finality that cannot be undone, marking the end of one life and the uncertain beginning of another, while Allie walks forward into a future she did not plan but chose anyway, carrying the knowledge that truth has consequences but silence has far worse ones. And though both of them are forever changed by the secret revealed, it is Noah who will carry the heaviest burden, living each day with the understanding that his greatest loss was not freedom or reputation, but the moment he forced the woman who loved him to become the one who told the world who he truly was. The chapter tightens its grip in a single breathless rush as Noah sits alone in his cell listening to the distant clang of metal doors and the low murmur of voices that no longer belong to his life, because the silence between those sounds is where regret lives, expanding, suffocating, replaying Allie's testimony with brutal precision, every word she spoke dismantling the excuses he once used to sleep at night. And when he is escorted down the corridor for a brief meeting with his lawyer, The reflection in the scratched glass startles him, revealing a man he barely recognizes, hollowed out by the knowledge that the worst damage he caused cannot be undone by any sentence or appeal, while across town Allie stands at her window watching the sky darken, her phone face down on the table because she knows no message can change what has already been set in motion, and though her chest still aches with the loss of the man she loved, there is a strange steadiness beneath the pain, a quiet certainty that she chose the only path that would not destroy her, and as Noah is told that the innocent man he allowed to suffer has been released, the news hits him harder than the bars ever could, because it confirms what Allie tried to make him see, that every lie creates a ripple of harm far beyond its origin, and in that moment he finally stops blaming circumstances and accepts the truth that his fear, not fate, built this prison. And when night falls and the station lights flicker on, Allie steps outside into the cooling air and breathes deeply for the first time in days, understanding that freedom is not the absence of pain but the courage to carry it honestly, while Noah lies back on the narrow cot staring at the ceiling, realizing with devastating clarity that his greatest punishment will be living with the memory of the moment Allie walked into the police station and chose truth over him, because that was the instant his future fractured, leaving him with nothing but time and the inescapable knowledge that regret, once born, never truly lets go.